The 3 words cut through the restaurant like a blade through silk. Every conversation died. Every hand froze mid-reach for wine glasses worth more than most Seoul apartments. The soft jazz bleeding from hidden speakers seemed obscene against the sudden, suffocating silence. Olivia Harper stood in the center of the private dining room, her hand still pointed at Kim Gi-hwan's chest, her mouth still open from speaking words she could never take back. 30 seconds ago, he had called her useless. What were those 3 words? And how did a woman the Mafia boss dismissed as useless manage to freeze an entire room of Seoul's most dangerous men? Subscribe to find out how Olivia Harper walked into Kim Gi-hwan's world and forced him to acknowledge her power. The HANNAM-DONG restaurant was the kind of place where Korea's untouchables came to negotiate empires. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Han River. Black marble tables set with silver chopsticks that cost more than college tuition. Waiters trained to serve in perfect silence, to forget everything they heard, to disappear into the walls like ghosts. Olivia had shattered that silence. At 29, she learned to read the danger in a room the way others read weather forecasts. The nervous glances between Gi-hwan's tattooed lieutenants. The cold assessment in the eyes of the rival faction seated 3 tables away. The way the restaurant manager had gone pale when she'd burst through the door, desperation overriding survival instinct. She'd known interrupting this meeting was suicide. She'd come anyway. Kim Gi-hwan sat perfectly still at the head of the table, a man carved from expensive menace. At 35, he wore power like his tailored Tom Ford suit, effortlessly, with quiet lethality. The dragon tattoo coiling up his neck seemed to pulse in the candlelight. His hands, decorated with rings that doubled as weapons, rested flat on the white tablecloth. Those hands had built an empire the law pretended not to see. Real estate developments that displaced entire neighborhoods. Import businesses that moved more than luxury goods. Territory bought with blood and silence, stretching from Gangnam to Busan. Everyone in Seoul knew. You didn't cross Kim Gi-hwan. Everyone except the woman currently staring him down. You are useless, he had said, his voice carrying the kind of contempt that ended careers, relationships, lives. He'd said it in front of his men, in front of his rivals, in front of the terrified waitstaff pressed against the walls. He'd said it to destroy her. But Olivia had learned something in the chaotic months orbiting Gi-hwan's dangerous world. The most powerful men fear only one thing. The truth they've buried. So she'd spoken 3 words in perfect, clear Korean. 3 words she'd risked everything to earn the right to say. 3 words that revealed she was never the fragile outsider he'd assumed. Now the dragon tattoo on Gi-hwan's neck flexed as he swallowed. For one crystalline second, something raw flickered across his face. Shock, calculation, something that might have been fear before his features reset into cold control. The rival faction leader leaned forward slightly, reading the shift in power like a shark scenting blood. Gi-hwan's head of security moved his hand inside his jacket. The restaurant manager looked like he might faint. And Olivia realized, with the clarity of someone who'd just jumped off a cliff, that there was no going back. She'd just forced the most dangerous man in Seoul to choose, acknowledge her value, or destroy the carefully constructed empire he'd built on secrets she now held in her palm. The silence stretched. Then Kim Gi-hwan did something no one in that room had ever seen. He smiled. The smile disappeared as quickly as it had come. Gi-hwan rose from his chair with the fluid grace of a predator uncoiling. The movement sent a ripple through the room. His 4 lieutenants shifted weight, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. The dragon tattoo seemed to writhe as he buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Bakya Euro Nagara," he said softly. "Get out." His voice was silk wrapped around a blade. The kind of quiet that made men vanish into the Han River with concrete shoes. But he'd made a mistake. He'd switched to Korean, not for her benefit, but for theirs. The 8 men at the surrounding tables, the rival faction from Busan who'd come to negotiate territory and tribute. He was performing now, reasserting dominance in front of an audience that measured power in millimeters of weakness. Olivia's hands trembled, but she didn't move. Across the room, she saw one of the waiters, a kid barely 20, pressing himself against the wall so hard he might merge with it. The restaurant manager had disappeared entirely, probably calling someone, anyone, to handle the foreign woman who'd just committed suicide in his establishment. The Busan underboss, a man with silver threading his temples and scars crossing his knuckles, leaned back in his chair, watching, calculating, a wolf testing whether the alpha had grown weak. Gi-hwan took 2 steps closer. Now he stood near enough that Olivia could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to, back when she'd had a normal life. Enya Ga Museum Malia Olhaya Tnunjinyan Morajejiman. He continued, his tone dropping lower, more dangerous. I don't know what you think you said. Hajiman Yajinian Enya O Gadian Saram Duli Ol Gatsiania. But this is not a place for people like you. People like you. Outsiders. Foreigners. Women who didn't understand that interrupting Kim Gi-hwan's business meant choosing death. His head of security, a mountain of a man called Jae-sung, stepped forward, awaiting the signal. One word from Gi-hwan, and she'd be escorted out. Escorted being a polite term for dragged into a black SUV and driven somewhere her body would feed the fish while Seoul slept. The rival faction watched like theater critics at opening night. Gi-hwan's own men watched for the crack, the weakness, the moment their boss failed to control his own world. The waitstaff watched because they couldn't look away from an execution. Majamag Jihoyaya, Gi-hwan said, and now his voice carried the weight of finality. Last chance. Nagara. Jigeum. Leave. Now. Olivia's throat was dry. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted to escape the cage of her body. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to bow, to apologize in broken Korean, and flee this place of marble and menace. But she'd come here for a reason. She'd discovered something that changed everything. And if she walked away now, the decision he was about to make, the alliance with the Busan faction, the territory expansion that would destroy innocent people caught in the crossfire, would happen anyway. Except she'd already burned her bridge. He would hunt her down for the disrespect. So Olivia did the only thing she could. She raised her chin and spoke again, this time in English, loud enough for every person in that frozen restaurant to hear. I'm not leaving until you listen. Something flickered in Gi-hwan's eyes. Not anger. He was too controlled for that. Curiosity, perhaps. The kind a scientist shows before dissecting an interesting specimen. This deal, Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. She gestured toward the Busan faction's table. The territory expansion into Gi-hwan. You're giving them access to the commercial district in exchange for their support against the Chinese syndicates. The Busan underboss's expression sharpened. Information that specific wasn't public knowledge. Gi-hwan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You know nothing about my business. I know Park Min-jun is your ally, she pressed on. He's held Gi-hwan for 8 years. He's paid you tribute. He's kept the peace. Her hands clenched at her sides. And you're about to sell him out to these men because you want a war with the Triad that he refused to support. The silence in the room changed texture. Became sharp-edged, dangerous. One of Gi-hwan's lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, muttered something under his breath. The Busan underboss set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care. Park Min-jun is weak, Gi-hwan said, his voice flat, emotionless. Weak men don't survive. They drag down everyone around them. He took another step closer, towering over her now. You think you understand the game we play? This world has rules you cannot comprehend. Park refused to expand because he's become soft, sentimental. He thinks we can coexist with the Chinese cutting into our ports, our supply lines, our territory. So you'll start a war? Olivia said. You'll flood Gi-hwan with Busan soldiers, force Park out, and when he retaliates, you'll have your excuse to eliminate him. Then you'll have both factions under your control when you move against the Triad. Gi-hwan's expression remained carved from ice, but she saw it, the flash of surprise that she'd mapped his strategy so completely. And how many people die in the crossfire? She continued, her voice rising. How many small business owners in Gi-hwan lose everything when your war spills into the streets? How many families? Families. Gi-hwan's laugh was cold, sharp. You broke into my meeting to lecture me about families? He turned slightly, addressing his men, the Busan faction, performing again. She thinks we are playing children's games. She thinks power is built with mercy. He pivoted back to her, and now his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Park Min-jun will fall because he forgot the first rule of survival: adapt or die. The Chinese are moving into Korea whether we are ready or not. I will not wait for them to devour us piece by piece. His eyes were black, bottomless. I will strike first. I will consolidate power. And if Park is too weak to stand with me, then he is against me. He trusted you, Olivia whispered. Trust, Gi-hwan said, is a luxury only the dead can afford. He gestured to Jae-sung. Remove her. The mountain of a security chief stepped forward, reaching for Olivia's arm. And that's when she said it. The 3 words that had brought her here. The 3 words she'd been terrified to speak. The 3 words that made Gi-hwan's hand snap up, freezing Jae-sung mid-reach. I'm his daughter. The room held its breath. Gi-hwan stared at her for 3 long seconds. Then he did something worse than shouting, worse than threatening. He laughed. Not the cold, sharp sound from before. This was genuine amusement, the kind reserved for children who've said something absurdly naive. The sound cut through Olivia deeper than any insult could have. You came here, he said, still smiling, into my meeting, in front of my associates and rivals, to tell me I should protect Park Min-jun because, what? You feel sorry for small business owners. He turned to his lieutenants, to the Busan faction, inviting them to share the joke. She thinks the world runs on sympathy. Several of his men chuckled obediently. The Busan underboss's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a less predatory face. Olivia felt heat rising in her cheeks. Shame, anger, desperation mixing into something that made her vision blur at the edges. You don't understand, she started. No. Gi-hwan's voice cracked like a whip. The laughter died instantly. You don't understand. You are a foreigner who has been in Seoul for what? 6 months? A year? You think you've seen enough, learned enough, to walk into my world and tell me how to run it. He moved closer, and now his presence was suffocating. The dragon tattoo seemed to pulse with each word. You know nothing about what it takes to hold power in this city. Nothing about the blood I've spilled, the enemies I've buried, the wars I've fought to build what I have. His voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. You are a distraction, an annoyance. A woman who should have stayed invisible, but decided she was important enough to interfere. Each word landed like a physical blow. Olivia's hands shook. Her carefully rehearsed speech, the leverage she'd come to use, all of it was crumbling under the weight of his contempt. I'm trying to help you, she whispered. Help? Gi-hwan's eyebrows rose. You think I need help from you? He turned his back on her, the ultimate dismissal, and began walking toward his table. His lieutenants relaxed slightly, reading the situation as resolved. The Busan faction returned to their drinks. The waitstaff began to breathe again. Then Gi-hwan paused. He looked back over his shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice carried throughout the entire restaurant with devastating clarity. Solmoyamnian. Useless. The word hung in the air like poison. Not weak. Not foolish. Not even wrong. Useless. Without value. Without purpose. Without worth. One of the waiters flinched in sympathy. The Busan underboss smirked into his whiskey. Olivia felt something crack inside her chest. All the fear, the desperation, the dangerous hope that had driven her here. It collapsed into a single point of white-hot clarity. She'd known this moment would come. She'd prepared for it. She'd spent 3 weeks confirming what she'd discovered, verifying the truth, steeling herself for this exact instant when Kim Gi-hwan dismissed her as beneath his notice. But knowing it would happen and experiencing the public humiliation were different universes of pain. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. And then, from somewhere deeper than fear, deeper than shame, she found her voice. Park Min-jun, she said clearly, is my father. The words landed like a grenade in the center of the restaurant. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Not the waitstaff pressed against the walls. Not the Busan faction frozen mid-drink. Not Gi-hwan's lieutenants, their hands still resting on concealed weapons. Even the jazz seemed to hesitate, a saxophone note hanging suspended in air thick with shock. Olivia watched the information detonate across the room in slow motion. The young waiter's eyes went wide, suddenly understanding why this foreign woman had been willing to die interrupting Kim Gi-hwan's meeting. The restaurant manager, visible now in the doorway, went from panic to calculation. Park Min-jun's daughter meant protection, meant consequences, meant this wasn't a simple removal. The Busan underboss set down his glass with hands that had gone very still. His eyes flickered between Olivia and Gi-hwan, rewriting every assumption. The deal they'd come to negotiate, taking Park's territory, had just become exponentially more complicated. You could eliminate a weak ally. But his daughter, standing in front of witnesses, claiming protection? That was different mathematics entirely. Gi-hwan's lieutenant with a scarred eyebrow inhaled sharply. Another lieutenant, older, with silver threading his temples, looked like he'd just watched his boss step on a landmine. They'd served Gi-hwan long enough to read the board. Park Min-jun had clearly kept his foreign daughter secret, protected, separate from the criminal world that could devour her. Until tonight. Until she'd forced herself into visibility to save him. Jae-sung, the mountain of a security chief, stood with his hand still extended from his aborted grab. His expression suggested he was recalculating every possible outcome of touching her now. Park Min-jun was known for two things: running Gi-hwan with quiet efficiency, and protecting what was his with terrifying violence. His daughter qualified as both. But it was Gi-hwan's reaction that made the room hold its breath. He'd gone completely still. The dragon tattoo no longer seemed to move. His face had shifted from contempt to something unreadable, a blankness that his men recognized as dangerous. When Kim Gi-hwan went quiet, people died. The power in the room had shifted on its axis. 30 seconds ago, Olivia had been a nuisance to be removed. An outsider. Useless. Now she was a protected asset. A political piece on the board. The daughter of a man who commanded loyalty, territory, and soldiers. A man Gi-hwan had been about to betray. If he threw her out now, Park would hear about it within the hour. Every person in this restaurant was a witness. The Busan faction would carry the story. The waitstaff would whisper. His own men would remember. If he hurt her, Park would come for him, alliance or not. Father and daughter were lines even monsters didn't cross lightly. But if he acknowledged her, listened to her, he'd show weakness in front of the Busan faction. He'd prove that a woman, a foreign woman, could walk into his meeting and force his hand. Olivia watched him calculate, watched the cold intelligence behind his eyes weigh options, measure consequences, evaluate paths forward. The entire restaurant waited to see which Kim Gi-hwan would emerge. The businessman who understood political value, or the killer who refused to be challenged. Gi-hwan took a slow sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving her face. Your father made his choice when he refused to support the move against the Chinese. That made him a liability. He set the glass down with controlled precision. But you already knew that. What I want to know is how. How I found out about your deal with Busan. Park keeps his operations separate from mine. Deliberately. We have an understanding. He pays tribute. I leave Gi-hwan alone. The dragon tattoo shifted as he tilted his head. So how does his daughter, who he's kept hidden from this world, learn the details of a negotiation that was arranged 3 days ago through encrypted channels? Olivia's hands were steadier now. She'd crossed the threshold. There was no safety in retreat. I've been working at the Shilla Hotel for 4 months. In the lounge. Something flickered in Gi-hwan's expression. Recognition. The bar where your lieutenants meet, she continued. Where Minho brings associates when he wants somewhere public, but not too public. Where business gets discussed over drinks that look social. You've been spying. His voice went soft, dangerous. I've been listening. She met his gaze. My father didn't know. He thought I was working a normal job, staying away from his world like he'd asked. But I heard rumors. Whispers that you were consolidating power, that you wanted to move against the Triad. Her throat tightened. That allies who wouldn't join you were being repositioned. Listening to drunk men talk is different from knowing operational details. Minho drinks Macallan 18. After the third glass, he gets quieter, not louder. More careful with his words. Olivia's voice dropped. But his phone doesn't lock when he sets it face down on the bar. And when he goes to the bathroom, he leaves it there. Trusts that no one would dare. Gi-hwan's expression shifted infinitesimally. Impressed, perhaps. Or furious. I photographed his messages 2 nights ago, she said. The entire negotiation structure. Busan gets Gi-hwan commercial access. You get their soldiers for the Triad offensive. My father gets sacrificed as the example of what happens to men who hesitate. You risked your life for photographs. I risked my life because he's my father. Her voice cracked, just slightly. He spent 20 years building something in Gi-hwan. He's not weak, he's smart. He knows a war with the Chinese will spill civilian blood. Will destroy the neighborhood. He's protected. Protected, Gi-hwan repeated. He runs protection rackets. He keeps order. There's a difference. Olivia stepped closer, closing the distance between them. A dangerous move, but she was past calculating safety. And you know it. That's why you kept him around this long. Park Min-jun holds Gi-hwan because the people there trust him more than they fear him. Trust. Gi-hwan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You sound like him. I am his daughter. Yes. He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You are. So what happens now? Olivia asked. You call my father. Tell him his daughter just burned your deal with Busan. Let him know I've been photographing your lieutenant's phone. Gi-hwan poured himself another measure of whiskey. This time, he poured a second glass and slid it across the table toward her. Not hospitality. Acknowledgement. What I should do, he said quietly, is exactly that. Park would pull you from Seoul within hours. Send you back to whatever life you had before. You'd be safe, hidden, useless to everyone. There it was. That word again. But you won't. Olivia didn't touch the whiskey. Because you're already calculating how this changes the equation. His silence was confirmation. The Busan faction saw me, she continued, her voice gaining strength. They heard me claim Park Min-jun as my father. They watched you clear the room instead of having me thrown out. She took a breath. If you move against my father now, it won't look like strategy. It'll look like you were challenged by a woman and had to eliminate the embarrassment. Careful. The warning in his voice was soft, but absolute. I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm showing you the board. Olivia moved closer to the table, close enough to see the calculation happening behind his dark eyes. You wanted Busan's support to move against the Triad. But what you actually need is someone who can hold territory while you're fighting that war. Someone the neighborhood trusts. Someone who won't collapse the moment you redirect your soldiers north. She saw it land. Saw the shift in his expression. My father can give you that, she pressed. He can keep Gi-hwan stable. Keep the civilian casualties low. Keep the police from getting involved. Busan would bring you soldiers, but they'd bring you chaos. Refugees. Media attention. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. You need Park Min-jun more than you need Busan. You just wanted him compliant. Gi-hwan lifted his glass, studying the amber liquid. And you think showing me photographs from my own lieutenant's phone proves compliance? No. It proves I can get information you need. Olivia's pulse hammered, but she kept her voice level. Minho trusts his environment too much. How many other associates do the same? How many deals are you not seeing because your men assume they're invisible in public spaces? The silence stretched. You called me useless, she said quietly. But I walked into the Shilla Hotel as nobody. A foreign bartender. Invisible. And in 4 months, I mapped your entire operation's social network. I identified which lieutenants talk, which ones stay silent, who drinks too much, who keeps secrets. She finally picked up the whiskey glass. You have soldiers. You have money. But you don't have someone who can move through Seoul the way I can. Someone no one sees as a threat. Gi-hwan set down his glass with careful precision. Until tonight, he said. Tonight, you made yourself very visible. Tonight, I made myself valuable. Olivia met his gaze. There's a difference. His mouth curved into something that might have been respect. Yes, he said softly. There is. Gi-hwan moved to the door and opened it precisely 6 inches. Minho. Inside. Now. His second-in-command appeared within seconds. Close enough to have been waiting. Far enough to have given privacy. The older man's eyes flickered to Olivia, then back to his boss, reading the temperature of the room. Close the door, Gi-hwan said. Minho obeyed, his expression carefully neutral. 20 years in this organization had taught him when to ask questions and when to simply listen. This was a listening moment. Gi-hwan returned to his position near the table, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing him against Seoul's glittering skyline. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. Olivia Harper is Park Min-jun's daughter. This information does not leave this room except through channels I designate. Understood. Understood, Hyungnam. Minho's face betrayed nothing, but Olivia saw his hand tighten almost imperceptibly at his side. Park Min-jun's daughter was a political earthquake. The Busan negotiation is suspended, Gi-hwan continued. Contact their leadership tomorrow. Tell them we're exploring alternative arrangements. Be courteous. Be vague. Any. Yes. Park Min-jun's territory remains his own. Gi-hwan stays independent. Any operation that touches his district comes to me for approval first. Gi-hwan's eyes were cold, absolute. Anyone who moves against Park without my explicit order will answer to me personally. Min-ho's eyebrows rose a fraction, the equivalent of open shock from a man trained in discretion. This was a complete reversal of the strategy they'd been building for months. And Olivia Harper, Gi-hwan said, his tone sharpening, is now under my direct protection. The room seemed to contract. Assign 2 of our best to her. Not enforcers, intelligence operatives. People who can move quietly. He gestured slightly toward Olivia without looking at her. She works in public spaces. Her protection needs to be invisible, but absolute. Hyungnam, Min-ho said carefully. If I may ask, what is her role? Gi-hwan was quiet for a moment, and Olivia realized he was choosing his words with the same precision he'd used defusing a bomb. What he said now would define her place in the organization, would dictate how every lieutenant, every soldier, every associate would treat her. She is my eyes where I cannot see, he finally said. She moves in spaces we cannot. Here's conversations we miss. His voice dropped into something harder. She is not to be touched, not to be questioned, not to be interfered with. If she requests information, she gets it. If she identifies a problem, you bring it to me. Min-ho's expression had shifted from neutral to something like cautious respect. Should I inform the other lieutenants? Tomorrow. Private meetings. Make sure they understand the cost of forgetting. Gi-hwan turned slightly, finally looking at Olivia. She has proven her value. Anyone who treats her as less than essential will learn exactly how essential they are not. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Min-ho bowed, deeper than before. Not to Gi-hwan alone. The slight inclination of his head toward Olivia was brief, but unmistakable. Acknowledgement. I'll make the arrangements tonight, he said. Good. Now leave us. When the door closed again, Olivia released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The November air hit Olivia like a slap when they stepped outside. Seoul's HANNAM-DONG glittered around them, luxury boutiques and high-rise apartments housing Korea's untouchables. The restaurant's valet brought Gi-hwan's black Genesis G90 to the curb without being asked, then disappeared like smoke. 2 men materialized from the shadows. Her new protection, she assumed. They kept their distance, but their presence was unmistakable. Invisible but absolute, just as Gi-hwan had ordered. I'll have someone drive you home, Gi-hwan said, opening the rear passenger door. I can take the subway. You can. But you won't. Not a threat. A statement of fact. You made yourself visible tonight. That has consequences. Olivia slid into the car. The leather still held warmth from the heater. Gi-hwan moved around to the other side, settling in beside her rather than taking the front seat. The door closed, sealing them in expensive silence. The driver pulled into traffic without waiting for directions. He already knew where she lived. Of course he did. The photographs, Gi-hwan said after several blocks. The ones from Min-ho's phone. I want them. Olivia pulled herself from her jacket pocket, navigated to an encrypted folder, and handed the device to him. He studied the images in silence, transaction details, territory maps, timelines. Evidence of a betrayal he'd engineered himself. You could have sold these to Park, he said quietly. Let him prepare. Given him a week's advantage. I didn't want him to prepare for war. I wanted to stop the war from happening. Gi-hwan deleted the photographs one by one, his thumbs moving with deliberate precision. When he finished, he handed the phone back. You should have come to me 3 days ago, before the Busan faction arrived, before you had to gamble everything in front of an audience. It was as close to an apology as a man like him could give. Would you have listened? Olivia asked. He was quiet for a long moment, watching Seoul stream past the tinted windows. The Han River glittered to their left, dark water reflecting a million city lights. No, he admitted. I would have seen you as Park's daughter trying to protect her father. I would have dismissed you. Useless, she said softly. The words sat between them like a third passenger. I was wrong. Gi-hwan turned to look at her, and in the dim light from passing street lamps, his expression was different. Still controlled, still dangerous, but something had shifted. You forced me to see what I was missing. That takes either courage or stupidity. My father would say both. His mouth curved slightly. Park always was perceptive. The car pulled up to a modest apartment building in Gi-hwan. Her father's territory, she realized. Protected ground. The men assigned to you will make contact tomorrow, Gi-hwan said. Learn their faces. Trust their judgment. And Olivia, he waited until she met his eyes. This world you've entered doesn't forgive mistakes. Your value keeps you alive. Don't forget that. She wouldn't. Couldn't. Because tonight had taught her the most dangerous truth. In Kim Gi-hwan's soul, safety wasn't given. It was earned with blood, secrets, and 3 perfectly chosen words. 3 words changed Olivia's fate. 1 click keeps you in the story. Subscribe for more.